Hey everyone, before we start the episode, I just wanted to give you a quick update on a couple things. The Southern California Linux Expo is next week, March 5th through 8th. If you're in LA area and want to come, Autumn and I will both be there. We will have Fork Around and Find Out stickers. We're also doing an interview in person with Mark Rusunovich at the conference. Sign up with our discount code FAFOF. It's supposed to be FM, but it didn't fit. It's only 5 characters. So FAFOF will give you 40% off a ticket. It's already a reasonable conference. I think that drops the ticket price to maybe $60 or something crazy. So sign up, come out. If you see us there, please say hi. We'll be around the conference for all 4 days. I'm also giving a talk about immutable Linux on Sunday, so feel free to stop by if you want to check it out. I wanted to let more people know that we also have a newsletter in case you forgot or didn't know at all. You can sign up at fafo.fm. There's a newsletter sign up form there. We're trying to add a little more information into the newsletter to make it more useful. Right now, I have a section I call 99 Problems, and that just talks about some of the outages from the last month. It turns out they're being more frequent than they used to be, and I'm just trying to keep a log of that. So if you're the type of person who likes newsletters, feel free to sign up. We send out the newsletter with every episode, and we might be putting out a few more just for fun, because there's a lot of stuff we get to talk about, and not all of it fits in a show. So please make sure you subscribe, because we also have other events that we usually talk about in that space. At the end of March, I'm also going to be at KubeCon EU in Amsterdam. I'll be hanging out at the Sidero Labs booth most of the time, or walking around. I have a brand new cluster to walk around with, so find me with my backpack, and maybe you'll get to do something fun in that cluster. Autumn's also going to be at the Linux Fest Northwest in April. So if you're in the United States, Pacific Northwest, check that one out. Lots of good talks, fun times, linuxfestnorthwest.org. I have links for everything in the show notes, so click a link there instead of trying to remember any of this, and enjoy the episode. Welcome to Fork Around and Find Out, the podcast about building, running, and maintaining software and systems. Hello and welcome to Fork Around and Find Out. I am your host, Justin Garrison, and with me as always is Autumn Nash. How's it going, Autumn? I hear you typing. You're doing something else.
The horrors persist, and so do I.
This is our second episode of 2026, which we recorded the last episode in December, so we didn't know what 2026 was going to be like.
It's the 21st, and it feels like it's been a year. Okay?
I know. January has just been way too long. But welcome to February, because that's when this episode's coming out. So. Thank you everyone for listening. On today's episode, we have Cat Hicks, who is a psychological scientist at Catharsis Consulting. That's it. It's all the C's. Okay. And also an author. Cat, thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. The horrors persist, but I remain silly. So here we are to talk about
the only way to cope.
Doctor and a scientist and badass.
Thank you.
Dr. Cat Hicks. Yes, thank you so much.
It's nice to hear some love for science, after the year we had and the year we're about to have.
We here on Fork Around and Find Out absolutely believe in science.
It's so interesting, and I feel like you have two of such interesting intersects.
Yeah, I know the social sciences are quite interesting. They're sort of there everywhere, but also in between everything. And it's an interesting world to be a part of. I've always been very interested in being at the margins of existing fields and kind of sticking my, hands in another field and seeing what I can drag over there. So I've always been a very multidisciplinary person, but I love psychology ever since I was a teenager. That's kind of been a thing I've used to understand the world.
And that's roughly where I found you. You were dropping some knowledge on Blue Sky, and you had some. I love it when someone's like, "Here's a white paper about the thing that I'm talking about," and I'm diving deep into that. And so, can you tell us a little about what your field is, what you kind of study, and kind of what some of that history has looked like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd call myself an applied interventionist if we wanted to use the academic jargon, but I describe it to folks in tech like I want to be a psychologist for the human beings who are in tech. So I lead research projects, and I've done that in a lot of contexts, but I use methods from all across the board to do that. So sometimes I might have, the opportunity to do like a scrappy little survey where we try to surface developer voices. And sometimes I've had the wonderful opportunity to do something way bigger. And that, I think, was the work that you came across. We published a paper in Empirical Software Engineering, a great journal that highlights work like this. And we were able to look across, thousands of data points over a year of time. And that brings in the interventionist side of me, which is the part of me that always wants to say, what can we learn from the data and the world about human behavior and how it moves and changes over time? And a lot of stuff that I'm very interested in tech is also about what are the mental models that we're using to describe technical work, to make predictions about what will make it successful. And, a lot of the times also kind of shift our own behavior in the moment, or think about, what does it make, what do I have to do to become a successful developer? So I'm interested in like many, many pieces of that, from like the very big measuring organizations over a year to the very small, like in a moment where a developer is getting criticism in a code review, how is that criticism making them feel? Is it making them doubt their skills, or is it going to be a moment where they kind of double down on learning and, feel more like they belong, not less like they belong? So that's sort of the range of what I look at and care about. And I think that shows you how big psychology is. It can go from the moment of an individual thought up to how do we measure, production across an organization for a year.
I really liked your project about code reviews. Do you think it differs between like male and female, and like depending on your background?
I would definitely think that those would be factors. We have some research actually out there by other people. I want to say Emerson Murphy Hill and that team did a project at Google on the level of pushback that people get during code reviews. And they looked at demographics. So they found, that the things you might expect. Women and people of color get more pushback during code reviews. And it's really helpful and interesting to compare this along these identity lines, right? Because, of course, it starts to show, this isn't just happening to me, it's happening to everybody who looks like me. And then that, is maybe something on the scale of the organization that's happening to all of us. So those effects for sure exist. I think we bring a lot of important social stuff into all of our technical problem solving. And to me, it's a really important contribution of psychology to try to help us unpack that and say, how do we change that? Yeah. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, it does. How do you feel that your work and work like yours can move forward in this current climate, I guess,
I'm taking a beat because
the current climate is a big, it's a big question.
With all the research projects that have been canceled, right?
Yeah,
diversity is kind of a dirty word at the moment.
Yeah. To me, you cannot understand people or the world of psychology. You can't do it without including that stuff. It's not like an add-on. It's not like a bonus. The logic of our world and the things that help me understand why an infrastructure engineer can be exploited by their workplace and why they end up in my email inbox and ask me, how do I repair this trauma when I tried to keep people in a hospital system safe and my boss didn't let me? It's the same cognitive, of course we go through different things. I'm not in any way saying that people have the same experiences, but the same skill sets and research and evidence from psychology lets me help that person. And also is the stuff that I bring to say, I want to look at women in tech. I want to look at, the experiences of people who are not being seen as technical, who are. It's all, for me, the same science. So it's really, really difficult to see this moment where we are trying to make it invisible, make it dangerous to do that work. And I guess my answer is I have to keep doing it because it is how any of this works. It's how we ever learn about any of it. You know, there's a side of it too I can speak to where I founded a research lab for the last few years. You know, we've closed down that project now, but when I founded the Developer Success Lab, which I ran for 3 years at Pluralsight, that was a vision of investing in open science for developers and for software teams and hiring PhD psychologists, you know, to ask questions that no one else was asking, to ask about things that developers kept putting in my inbox, but no one was like kind of willing to really do a research topic on this, you know, very sensitive or scary or hard stuff. So when we put out with that team work like code review anxiety work, we studied AI skill threat, we studied people fearing that they were going to be misevaluated. We also set up recruiting at that organization had never done before. So we created our own institutional review board, which is like an ethics board for giving you permission to do studies that, you know, include sensitive things. We recruited LGBTQ developers in our studies. And every step of the way, I got to tell you, people said, Cat, you can't do this and it's not going to work. Like, not out of malice. I had great support at Pluralsight, you know, but these were very scary moments for me personally. So just to speak to, I was in the room with, you know, the head of legal saying, yes, we can collect this data and here's why and here's how we're going to make it safe. And I'm going to get on stage and present a gender effect in tech to an audience of strategic clients, you know, that run banks, right? So being in these intersections is actually not new for me at all. I did education work before I worked with software teams. And in that too, I was often a researcher saying, we have to look at these hard topics, and sometimes in very politically contentious rooms, like public school districts that had, you know, where people had big agendas for what was going to be on the curriculum or not, or whether we were going to invest in the free and reduced lunch program or not. So, you know, I guess there's part of me that likes to fight, you know?
I love that you don't shy away from it. Also, I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit because PhDs are so underfunded and underpaid. So it's really cool that you gave all those people a job in a really cool industry that will help them to have that on their resume, because it's going to be really hard for PhDs and it's just hard in general. So that's pretty cool.
It is really hard. I love that you said that. My wife is a tenured faculty member and has students that she's had to fight for, you know, and ran a huge program actually at UCSD that was defunded, was part of this. And this program that she ran placed students, community college students, into science labs. So it was this great, you know, long-running program where they directly paid folks, you know, who came from, you know, often the Inland Empire, like where I know Justin is, and has transformed people's lives, right? So to see that and those programs get lost has been really hard this year. But at the same time, what I'm also seeing in my world is everybody who works on this stuff is not stopping. Maybe
Such a
are
big deal.
Yeah.
Like these students don't have the money to like study half the time, and when they do, they get like they're working for like poverty wages usually. And
Definitely.
If their research doesn't get funded, their whole program just disappears.
Yeah. And I lived that life. You know, I couldn't afford a car my first year of grad school. And I think that when you live that life and then you come into tech and you see these just massive differences in, you know, what we experience and what gets resourced, I think it made me very, very curious to understand, like, where could I try to be a Robin Hood of this situation? And, you know, I actually see a lot of software engineers as my very strong allies. Like, I'm very grateful to this community for letting me kind of go out there and say, you know, I think we could take a chance on this. I think you all would really like what psychology could give you. If you can help me connect to sources of funding, you know, if you can help me I promise you I can bring you people who know how to do this. And so actually the work that Justin saw, we're really speaking to behind the scenes of it. But that is a real result of that. Like, I put out work with the Developer Success Lab. Folks in the community resonated with it, shared it, were posting it to LinkedIn. I very directly brought this to my leadership team and said, read these posts. Look at this. Developers want real science. Let me hire more PhDs. And I hired the great lead author, John Florney, on that, who did that project. And he had never worked with software teams before. And what he had done was worked on adolescent well-being and worked on, methodology for studying very complicated well-being topics over time. And was just not necessarily the background that a software team would ever look at and think, oh, that's for me, But I knew that he could bring in exactly these techniques that we needed and this perspective that we needed. Like, how do we, teach folks that making really simplistic averages of people's production is not a good representation of their actual mental work. So all of these kind of beautiful contributions from other scientists, I think, can be enabled by these structures if we can just learn how to build them. That's my mission.
I do think there's a lot of overlap between adolescent studies and engineering studies, right? Just in general.
You would not be, yeah. I mean, maybe you would not be surprised. I did, my PhD was in developmental psychology, actually. And for a while I got advice to not really share that in tech, it's going to make you seem not relevant. But, I studied the early formation of how we think about disclosing performance. And I've always found it super relevant.
How do you feel like your work as far as the human aspect of technology and working on the metrics and kind of the human focused area, how do you think that is relevant, I guess, and stays relevant in this kind of layoff Hunger Games version of tech that we're at? Before, people were really looking into making things a better at each company and trying to be a better employer. And right now it's kind of like, be happy you have a job. So
Right. Yes, how convenient isn't that message? Be happy you have a job, never question any culture. All the culture things, we're only allowed to talk about them if times are good, right? I don't believe that at all. I feel that this work is more relevant than ever because it is the work that helps us understand what's happening to us. And it certainly gets harder as everything has gotten harder. But I guess what I would offer, because I'm imagining somebody listening to this, your audience, somebody listening to this going through it. I went through a huge career upheaval this last year. I'm still in the middle of that. So this is very personal to me. It's not just made up, But to me, the work to have good evidence in this field and create things that actually help people innovate, that is, the need for that is even more obvious now because so many things are breaking down. So many things are revealed to not be serving us. So, simplistic measures of how much code you can write doesn't even make sense anymore in a world where, we're generating lots of code, right? So there's just a lot of, chaos and turmoil, but I always think that chaos and turmoil is a bit of an opportunity to say, well, let me find my people maybe who I didn't realize kind of that we could all unite because we all see this problem, but it's very hard to have a huge layoff happen. But we have this concept in psychology about post-traumatic growth that I also really, really believe in, that when you get really shaken out of the way you always did things and the things that were working for you, you do have the opportunity to ask, how did that happen? And maybe there was stuff that actually really wasn't working. And maybe I have the opportunity to build something very, very different. So I won't minimize the extreme difficulty of this time, but I do think that I feel sort of responsible for trying to come up with a more optimistic vision. Yeah.
How does that, going back to your study, the thing that caught my eye, and it was obviously the TLDR, what I read into it was your velocity metrics suck. Velocity is not the thing you should be measuring in this case. What have you learned through that is either not the correct metric, but a
Yeah.
better representation of what people are doing to measure, I have to sit in front of a computer
Yeah.
and think for a long period of time, usually between interruptions. And I also have other stresses going on. How do I make sure that the business is getting the value that they see out of that contract? Like, it's a business contract of like, you give me your time and brain, I will give you money. And that's how this works. But I need to know I'm getting my money's worth from a business perspective.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah, right. So I do think that there are, steps that we can take to make this significantly better without saying, okay, we have the whole solution. And you can see these even in our project. So in our project, we said, okay, people are looking at cycle time, but there are problems with how people are looking at cycle time, right? So one of the problems is they're not looking at it over a long enough period of time. So we're going to try to look at it over a year, across these organizations. Already opening up the window of that gives you certain superpowers. It lets you say, hang on, every time I take a measure from an individual, like one developer and his cycle time or her cycle time or their cycle time, you are actually also taking a measure of what's happening in the company. So if there's planning around that developer or they've been reorged. Right? Yeah. So broadening the window is one thing you can do. And you to be like scrappy and, strategic and like opportunistic about any way you can broaden that window. So for us, time was one of those windows because seasonality, shows up. As soon as you look at a year, you realize, oh, everybody's average cycle time is different. The other tip I would give, you can make a measure way more accurate and better just by thinking to yourself, am I looking at variation, not just averages? So you don't even have to be, a statistician. Like, I think you all should hire more statisticians, to be honest, like third tip. But even if it's just you, being asked to, say something about developer metrics, think about variation. So in our project, we looked at within the developer variation, and a lot of approaches to software metrics shove everything into an average and don't consider the possibility that sometimes someone's really fast and sometimes they're really slow. So it's not fair to say that that person is just an average middle of the road. That's not actually an accurate description of what's happening. What's happening is this work is very variable. So with that kind of little framing, you can start to ask yourself, I wonder if some parts of my software org have really variable cycle times and some parts are just a lot more steady. So I believe in very localized benchmarks and, localized thresholds that are aware of the situation, that we have feeding into how we're using measurement, these important distinctions rather than trying to lump all software development into like the single simple number, which clearly is failing us like over and over again, just collapsing so much information. So that's one, perspective we bring.
Does that?
I'll just say one more thing. The other thing I recommend is like, layer in some psychological variables. And I have a few that I suggest and that I actually put out there as easy survey items that we've tested over thousands of people. And that includes ask your developers if they have a learning culture, ask them if they feel sense of belonging. And I know this feels scary to people because it's culture stuff, but it can provide a really important signal to things going wrong that might not show up in the metrics. It can also provide a signal for, well, we think things are okay. Even though the velocity slowed down, it seems like so much good learning is happening. We're okay with that. It's different than a situation where nobody's learning and their, velocity's gone really down, which might be disengagement. So those are like the top tips, I would say.
I was trying to think, like, there is still a goal or a number or some collapsible thing at the end, right? If I'm thinking of this as like if I want to go buy a car, right? I can think of the car as a very simplistic system, which, like you were saying before, that like the human aspects in developments matter a lot, and that includes like return to office and layoffs and reorgs and all that other stuff. And if I just look like I want to go buy a car, I just need 4 wheels to go somewhere, and at the end of the day I'm gonna say I want 30 miles to the gallon. right? If this is a gas car, I'm just going to start with that and say like, oh, 30 miles a gallon. But if I go up a hill, I'm getting 10. If I'm going down a hill, I'm getting 50. And those average out to somewhere in there. It's like when I bought my car, like the average that says over your whole trip odometer of 50,000 miles or whatever, you've got 20. And I'm like, well, that's not what I wanted. Like the thing I actually wanted was 30. How do I improve that performance? And some of that comes down to the maintenance of the car. Some of it comes down to where I'm driving, how I'm driving, but a lot of it does like my foot on the pedal is the most significant factor in how good a gas mileage my car can get. And me knowing how to operate the car in an efficient manner, if the efficiency is my goal, is a big factor here. And I feel like some of that applies here where it's like, I want this number and I'm just going to smash the gas anytime I can. Why isn't the number right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So all of this applies. You said some of this applies. I think you are describing exactly what it's like, you know, if you're going to, so this is why I call myself an interventionist, you know, what do the interventions that we make on this complicated world do for us? That's kind of the simple question. And you might know pretty clearly, okay, it's my foot on the gas. That's the causal lever. But a lot of times with complex human behavior, like we actually don't know, right? Like what is the causal lever? And so this is like very much at the core of a lot of my work is what are good levers? And they're not going to represent the whole world, like no study or theory or model ever does. I don't know if you've heard the phrase, you know, all models are wrong. Some are useful.
Some are useful.
So
yep.
That's where engineers and psychologists are just like, we get it, you know, but so for me, you know, when I say measure learning culture, I say that because there are many, many behavioral and cognitive mechanisms that picks up on. It's not going to measure it perfectly. It's going to be what we call an operationalization. Sorry for all the jargon, but that's what we call it. When we try to turn something into, you know, a measure that we can actually use, it's always an imperfect process that we're using, but we're just trying, right? In the same way that your doctor knows that your blood pressure is not actually representing all the complex states in your body, but they are, you know, over time we've decided this is a pretty good indicator to move forward. So we have some of those indicators in psychology, and we know that they're indicators because they have worked over many, many people, you know, and if you do an intervention that moves it, that increases it, then you see good outcomes. And so that's, you know, the basic logic of trying to figure out how to create good behavior change often comes down to that scientific mindset. And I really, really believe that engineering organizations can have that scientific mindset. And I don't think that means I want you all to just be, you know, driven only by metrics or have this sort of, you know, world where you can't ever protest and say we're being measured badly. In fact, like no one will criticize a measurement more than, you know, a scientist, right? So I write about
and that's
this,
a huge point of like the like data driven is not scientific mindset. Like those are different things. I was
just about to say that. I think it's really funny though because tech is such a data driven culture.
Yeah.
Right? And then there's so much of what you said that this is backed up by science and data, right? And there's so much stuff about diversity and just different ways to treat people that is backed up by science and data, but they're completely ignored.
1,000,000%. That is...
And this is by like a culture that tells people how data driven they are over and over and over again.
Totally. And I think what you're pointing out there is it's hypocrisy. And so like for me, every time your little ding, 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 you know, you have this radar inside of you that's kind of like, this seems really hypocritical. You know, that is such an important like internal compass. And it's been very difficult for me actually to be a quantitative scientist sometimes in software teams. You know, I have been at conferences where engineering leaders have told me all data is fake, lies, all statistics are lies. And then I'm like, okay, well, cool talk. And then I walk on stage and I'm like, here's my work, which is all statistics. It's not all statistics, right? But
yeah,
I have found it's really useful to distinguish between data and metrics versus evidence. And I tell people I think you should have an evidence strategy. And that doesn't mean it has to be quantitative, because evidence can also be interviewing people. Us talking and the stories we tell is a form of evidence. In fact, to me, I really don't so much distinguish between qualitative and quantitative as much as the business world does. Like, we do research projects where, we interview people and we say, here's how practitioners are talking about it. And then also here's the, year of software metrics data. And the only way we're going to get forward is by continuing to be very multidimensional, including many forms of evidence, because some things you can only access in some ways. So to me, using the word evidence has been really helpful because it lets me do what I like to do, which is use everything around me to try to make things better. Like, why cut yourself off from any one of these things? But yeah, the hypocrisy thing is, it's a huge culture problem.
Which is weird because it's like you want the return on investment and you want people to give you as much as they can. So you would think that they would lean into that. You mentioned something really cool on your website about good problem-solving environments for innovation. Outside of doing different time variables, what else have you found creates that good problem-solving environment?
Autumn, we all know the answer to that is RTO. You have to be in an office.
Are you trying to hurt me?
I feel like that is just the one lever that every management in the last few years have pulled. They're like, oh, well, you know what? We need better collaboration, so we're going back to an office.
So you can get sick a ton and sit in traffic for 2 hours.
My favorite thing to ask is, so what will happen because of RTO? What is your actual, and this isn't me being mean a little bit sometimes to these, folks who I have debates with, but,
So what you're saying is we should be friends.
I love that. Yeah. I like to ask, look, what you're proposing is not actually RTO or not RTO, right? You're proposing that certain things are going to happen because of RTO. So prove to me that they're happening, And I think
some of those things, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things I'm really interested in is what do we attribute the change? So is the change actually from RTO, or is it from something that's hiding, or it's only happening because your remote system was so bad, that people never had the time to talk when you were because of the way you were running your remote work, right? As soon as you start to kind of force people to get specific, the initial frames they have, these very simplistic stereotype frames, can often fall apart. And so that's why I like to say, well, let's unpack that and ask. You say you care about collaboration. So define it, operationalize it. What are the behaviors of collaboration? And can you imagine a version of those behaviors online? Can you imagine a version of them in person? So very quickly, you'll start to get people realizing they think they're on the opposite side and they're not always, so that's nice.
Which is interesting that you can do that with people, get to see what the different actual perspective is. But I feel like a lot of people that are working together know that these things are not great. Yeah. And it's just like a disconnect between people running companies and people working in them.
I mean, one of the big things that I know was a internal driver for Amazon's RTO, Autumn, when we were both there, was Amazon was wasting billions of dollars on real estate, and getting butts back in seats was going to help them with that. I'm like, yeah, no, that'll help if people come to the office. Yes. But what else does that cost you?
So there's this thing that I wrote about one time that I call corporate attribution error. I don't know if you all know the phrase, the fundamental attribution error. Do you know this term at all? Okay, so the fundamental attribution error is such a fun one. We often look at something happening in the world and we say so say your coworker gets in late to work, and you want the explanation to be about them as a person, about their personality. So you say, you're late because you're lazy. That's a causal argument. And we have this bias. It's a strong cognitive bias, differs by cultures and things like that. But a lot of people have this very strong bias to say, well, my lateness at work is because of traffic. Your lateness at work is because you're lazy, and it's a character flaw. So I wrote this kind of joking post, but it really resonated with some people that corporations have attribution errors. So corporations have stories they put out about why they did things and why things happened. And sometimes it feels like you're only allowed to tell a certain story about what explains what when you're inside of a company. This is actually one reason that I believe that software teams could use people like me and the scientific evidence that we create to say, look, there's another explanation. Look, there really is an explanation that's not about this. It's actually about this other thing. And when you talk about making change with people who actually just genuinely don't care about the human side of things, I like to think about what pressures those people and what makes them feel like, oh, well, it's the cost of doing business. It's the cost of actually having a technology organization that I have to give these people a better culture. Whether or not their heart is actually in it, I do believe we can actually produce that evidence because that's how the human mind works. So I'm kind of on that path. Yeah.
That's what I'm like really confused by. I feel like the data that's come back from like RTO, data that's come back from, I mean, there was like a leak where Amazon said they were running out of people to hire like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
There's like so much, look at all the issues that Twitter's having, even though they said that they could fire so many people.
Yeah.
And it would stay up, but it's not really reliable and everybody's left. Like, I feel like there's so much evidence out there that's staring us in the face.
Yeah.
And we're still like being gaslit that it's all okay. You know what I mean? Like, at what point do wheels fall off and we decide to address the issues in the room?
What do you think is making that persist? Like, what do you think they are getting out of all the gaslighting?
I honestly don't know. I feel like all logic has gone out. Like, I think RTO and different things are when, like, the data-drivenness stopped at Amazon. So it's Yeah.
We don't go ahead.
I just wonder, like, with AI and all of this stuff, like, what is the end goal? Because if you run the engineers out, if you run so many things, like, your culture down, at the end of the day, when all this gets to whatever head it is, like, whether AI is successful or not, like, where do you leave, like, all these people in this industry and all the damage that was done?
Yeah. Could I share kind of what I think maybe they're getting out of this?
Please do.
I think they are running constant short-term cycles where they get rewards immediately and then they get to dump the cost of it on everybody else and they don't have to bear the cost of it themselves. And I think that it is a strategy that works. It works for the things they want it to work for, which is not actually what, and I'm when I say this, it's not like, oh, James Bond villain, stroking the cat. Like, it's a very big culture thing and behaviors that people don't even, they're part of it, but they don't even know they're part of it sometimes. And then some people are very actively have these strategies, right? So it's like a whole big thing. But I believe that we are capable as human beings of creating very destructive cultures. And we're capable of bringing really bad beliefs to the surface, right? And that is part of the cognitive architecture that lets us do horrible things to other people in the world. At the same time, we have many other parts of ourselves, the parts that decided that we needed a public education system, which was not a given for most of human history. The parts that decided we need, to care about human rights. These are all kind of battles you can see across human history. And I believe, that understanding what gets us stuck in a lot of these unproductive and sometimes very damaging short-term cycles and who's bearing the cost of it and who's not is really, really useful. Sometimes I have framed this, I work with a lot of infrastructure leaders who come to me and say, I am a VP now and I love and care about the people in this organization. Maybe they don't say that because they're not comfortable with the word love, but, and my team builds the infrastructure that helps other developers solve problems. And I'm starting to realize that we're not very respected. And I thought that I was going to get into leadership and that was all I needed, that I was going to be the boss and have and I understand that because I
respect by title.
I also thought that becoming a VP was maybe going to, match up to how people treated me or something. But I do try to tell, yeah.
It turns out you need the respect first.
Yeah. Well, I do try to tell people the reason it feels so hard is because you're starting to get more ambitious about making a much more powerful change. And it's a culture change. And that means that there are a lot of people who are benefiting from the way the current system is. And we're going to have to figure out how to change that, and maybe some of that means some of those people will lose some of their power. So
I feel
gosh,
like
this has gotten really philosophical.
Super, like what you just said applies to so much more than tech, though. Just like it applies to society overall.
How does that, that actually brings up a big question for me. How does this measurement and difference apply to something like a cost center, right? Like your infrastructure is a cost center, but your developers are often seen as creating value in like closer to the money. Right?
My gosh, I think that framing is so silly, honestly. Like, I mean, it was just like never how I thought about anything until I, was on a leadership team, and I was like, okay, I guess we can. To me, it's another corporate attribution error. Honestly, I understand that
toxic phrasing because like your infrastructure is your backbone, and you could easily describe it in a better phrased way that you can't do the more valuable work without the backbone there.
Yeah, I do think that, we have people who generate a lot of value, but that value gets spread out, right? The value is happening in the developer who you helped because you fixed their tooling. And so just like when I work on psychology things, I'm trying to get people to believe that if we invested in learning, down the road, way more innovation is going to happen. But at the time, what you're feeling as a manager is, oh my gosh, I'm not going to hit this deadline because I have to give someone an extra week to learn this new technology. So, it's so funny. It doesn't surprise me we went so deep in this conversation because if you look long enough at any human experience, I think you go really deep to these questions about, am I going to let myself take a risk? Am I going to let our environment take a risk and maybe sometimes take a hit for it? Like maybe sometimes make less money for this month, but it's a calculated strategic decision to do something valuable. And these are incredibly difficult problems. I mean, I fought these kind of battles all the time in the public education world, trying to say, we need to invest in these students' math learning. We need to invest in, bringing air conditioning into their classrooms if you want to improve math. These are incredibly clear connections in the research, but honestly, you can write as many papers as you want. That's not going to win the battle. What wins the battle is really showing up every time in these budget decisions and convincing a person who's going to make the budget decision and all this stuff. So that has become a part of what I've kind of started working on with engineering leaders. And I'm saying a lot of really big things, but I think all of us are part of huge systems we might not fix in our lifetimes, but we could still really fix a lot.
This is kind of a different topic, but I'm kind of curious how what you study and do and the metrics and things you bring to the table for companies, where does that relate to something like the DevOps metrics, the DevOps research and assessment, the Dora metrics by Nicole Forsgren, and how does that overlap? Like where are people saying I need Dora versus what you're bringing and telling them about?
People have Dora and use Dora, in all kinds of situations that I've worked on. I really wanted to include Dora metrics in our No Silver Bullets paper that you saw. We just didn't end up having a data infrastructure pipeline that could get us there, which this is a, real engineering lesson. Like, hey, if you don't build for being able to eventually ask questions, if you're not collecting and recording data, right? These are kind of just the gritty details of data work. But so, yes, I think of Dora just like I would think of any other measure. I ask questions.
Maybe explain what Dora is?
I'll just real quick, Dora metrics. A lot of people like in DevOps space engineering, like it's something that Nicole Forsgren in a group kind of championed back in the day, but it had 4 key metrics that show that if your organization is healthy, these metrics are good for you. And they have variations. They have great papers about it that's like show like the superstars in engineering have like really fast of these things. So like they are, I just looked them up too. It's change lead time. So how long it takes to like, I have an idea to get something in production kind of thing. Like how long does that cycle take? Deployment frequency, just in general, how often are you deploying? And this is like back in the day, DevOps kind of like gold metric that kind of turned out to be wrong, but also a little bit true. Change failure rates. So what percentage of all changes had failure? Where were your outages? That sort of stuff. And then mean time to recovery. When something goes wrong, how long does it take you to bring the system back up into a working state? Those are the 4 metrics. Yeah. 6 high, I forget the high performers or whatever have, certain metrics of that type. And then low performers are basically the opposite.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I see too, which is, the Dora project was a research project that was a survey-based project. So it in a lot of ways wasn't really the objective rating, that people treat it as. So I always kind of remind people of that. Listen, this is kind of self-report, which I use self-report data myself. That's totally interesting. But, I don't necessarily always agree with the typical Dora influence, let's say, because there's a broader community around it and there's how people use it. So beyond the project itself, I think people have taken from it this idea that we need to take a benchmarking approach and we need to figure out where we sit on these levels. And I understand that desire, just like you said, if you look at the gas mileage of a car, you have some thresholds you can compare it to. You understand like what's a reasonable range for this kind of car. You have that information. I'm not convinced that we have that information from the Dora projects, actually. I think that there's lots and lots of interesting concepts, but I think you start to see how complicated it is now because, I work with a lot of leaders who say, I measured Dora, but I still don't know what to change. So that to me is where intervention science needs to come in. Dora actually, to me doesn't really tell you what are the causal drivers of these things. Those could be the outcome measures that you want. I'm pretty agnostic to it. I had someone I was talking to about this recently, and he understandably said, should I use Dora? Will Dora give me what I need? And I looked at him and I said, will Dora give you what you need? I can't really tell you that because you're the one inside your org. So that's kind of a high level perspective on it. To me, it's like a proposed series of outcome measures. There are other ones that, I always think, take what somebody's proposing and test it in your org. I think my work fits broadly into the DevOps philosophy of bringing forward the voice of developers, for sure.
And I think that possibly a different take that you're going towards, especially with like the longer term vision of things, like let's look at a cycle for a year or stuff like that, is just the holistic approach instead of like local optimizations. Because if someone sees that like, oh, our metric for deployment speed is bad, an engineer's like, well, here's the lever I can control and I'm going to make builds faster. Right. It's like, but actually like the builds being, even if they're 100 times faster is probably not the slow part because the PM process and the ideas and how the actual thing gets executed into a deployed state is probably a lot longer than the Docker builds step.
I find it limited. I really do. And all things are limited, but for my purposes, for what I'm interested in doing, I have found it very limited. And one of the reasons for this is there's a thing we talk about in behavioral science that we call effect heterogeneity. You can have something that works in the lab or, that works in a research project, but you get into the real world and there are preconditions for making it work. For one team, tracking, lead time for changes is really, really useful. And for another team, it's really pushing them in the wrong direction. And those are, because there's something different maybe about, the way that their work is or what they need to focus on. So, you could kind of criticize anything and say there's a situation in which it won't work. So but I just think that I have experienced working with a lot of engineering teams that have said, I still don't know what to do. And so I think what those teams need actually is a process for, really being coherent and consistent about what they're actually changing and having that scientific mindset again. And so it's less about, this is the metric or that's the metric, and more like, well, let's try that metric, but what we need to evaluate are the changes that we're making instead of, all of these sort of simplistic stories. Yeah, I don't know if that made very much sense. I feel like I rambled there, but
I mean, that's like I don't think that's an answer, but I think that's getting the numbers and having the metrics and then everyone going and locally optimizing is not the right solution necessarily. It's like, okay, you have power over the thing you control. Can you affect that number? Maybe. Yeah, but it may not be the most effective use of your time or the company's time. And back to your point about like who's benefiting from the current system is a big question to ask on what levers should we change to change the culture to make this better for everyone, or at least balance the power or something, right? Like it doesn't have to be equal for everyone, but it should be driving towards the right thing.
Yeah, and definitely, sometimes we're trying to solve like a problem in the wrong place, So, okay, hey, listen, if Dora gives you a reason that you get listened to with other leaders in your org, to me, that is strategy, right? That's, hey, I understand that, and I've used that kind of thing myself, right? So, but at the same time, sometimes it means people are trying to solve a culture problem with Dora or something like that. And it just doesn't measure the right things, right? And
that's why they renamed everyone to DevOps. And they're like, we solved our culture problem. Everyone's a DevOps engineer now.
Yeah. It's kind of whack-a-mole, right?
And then there's like 5 different ways to do Agile with different names. It's doing the same thing.
We need more Scrum Masters.
That's right.
Get us.
Once you get the VP title, Justin, then you will be able to everyone will listen to you. Yeah. Yeah. But I will say, I'll just say one more thing about Dora, which is I feel that the sort of language it actually brought to us, the idea that we could have a project that's like shared and out there and is about engineering evidence, I feel like that vision is excellent. And that vision is something that has inspired me, not just Dora, but also, Microsoft Research and all kinds of other research sort of related investments. Those have become things that, I can point to and say, hey, listen, it's worth it for us to try to get shared evidence in this field that isn't really just owned by one company or something. And so that whole spirit I'm completely aligned with.
I mean, it's a shame that Google bought it and then killed it, right? Like Google deprecates everything. They deprecated Dora basically. Like when Nicole left Google, I'm like, you guys had one job. Like let her do amazing work. And she Google Cloud bought it. It's now, I don't know.
How do we get people to actually follow the research? Also,
I think you have to follow the researchers, and like pay attention to us, pay attention to where we're putting our work. We're always kind of bellwethers. I always believe this.
I love that a lot of the research community moved to Blue Sky because I know that Twitter was a great place to find
so
research.
Much with so many people coming to Blue Sky.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
It's great.
There's a weird number of social scientists went to LinkedIn, which I did not surprise. I did not expect at all, but
I mean, so much to say.
Whole other topic.
I had another. Go ahead, Autumn.
I also think the metrics are interesting when it comes to different kinds of engineering teams because you can't I've been on like a release / like DevOps team that you can't measure how many lines of code they write because it's not really about writing code, right? Like, so I think that there's so many different jobs as an engineer. Like you can be an engineer and then have completely different jobs over and over again. So I think that really makes it complicated on like what your team actually does when it comes to measuring. Like I think a lot of times it's measured for like a team that's like a service team or like
it's they assume like application engineer that's like creates something that is maybe customer facing but at least has some like direct tie to like business
and also
objectives.
Like as an SA with the people that were internal Amazon SAs, if you didn't have a customer, like part of the role guide was how much money you're making your customer, but you didn't have a customer because Amazon was your customer. Or for instance, like if you're a DevOps engineer, you're not writing tons of lines of code. Or if you work on a really mature service, you're not writing 1,000 lines of code. You're fixing one line of code and spending 6 hours to find that one line of code, right?
One of the biggest things I love to do is help people who have internal teams actually come up with a set of success measures that make their work a lot more visible and legible to their organizations for exactly this reason, because so many of the assumptions that people have about how we could measure the work of a team they come from those feature facing, they come from those sort of just a few teams, and they don't apply to all these other teams. But usually I find there's you could complicate this infinitely, but it's really useful to just say, let's say there are basically like three personas, and let's just start there and say, how would I measure this kind of engineer versus that kind of engineer? And folks have found that really, really useful. I had to think about this myself. I wrote a career ladder for research scientists at a company that had never had them. And we had, very typical for tech companies, right? We had, a career ladder for UX people, which assumed that you were not someone who had any of the skills of data science. And then we had a career ladder for data scientists, which is different market, and assumes all of these things. Every single thing I set up for my lab was challenging people's assumptions. I had to ping engineers and say, we need a repo, we need permission. I am a VP and I need to be able to write code. And they were like, what? So, but in those complicated conversations and in those moments where people's assumptions were challenged were very important moments of communication, right? Very important moments where I got to say, there's a principled reason. I'm not just trying to get credit or something like that. I need to put these people on this career ladder for these reasons. And it goes back kind of, Autumn, to what you were saying about being evidence-based. I was like, we can't just apply a career ladder that doesn't fit to these people. I will never be able to promote them correctly. So all
it's
of those,
that you actually fought for them that way. Because there's so many times where people are just not appreciated on certain teams, and they just assume that you'll move to another team.
No, that was necessary.
You sound like a really good boss. One thing I'm excited about with AI is I think that AI might not be good at some things, but it's very good at writing code in some ways, if you can really get
syntax.
So I think is this the point in which humans do become more important? Humans that can work with other people, humans that can talk and have conversations and explain things. Does this change what makes you a good engineer? Because I think we focus on being technical for so long that now a lot of the typical what makes you a good engineer skills, it's not going to be writing thousands of lines of code, because Copilot's going to do that for you. You know what I mean? So it's almost being a good the qualities that made people really good senior engineers, being able to teach, being able to talk to people, being able to do cross teamwork. I wonder if those now become more important, the social aspects. And then who does that I wonder if that gives women more of an edge and more accepting in tech, or just other people from different backgrounds.
Yeah. I want to take this in a couple of directions. There's a few different things I want to say, because that was such a rich observation, that pointed to so many big things. So first, I think that what you said, it used to kind of be that, we needed people to do this work with technical skills. I also think that what we saw as technical problem solving has always been very limited. So how many lines of code you can write, how fast, we assume that is a measure of technical problem solving. And for
they were terrible measures.
They were terrible measures, absolutely. And of course, we all mock it as well. We're all mocking lines of code or whatever. Lines of code looks even more ridiculous. Velocity looks even more ridiculous when someone can tell you that they wrote this code really fast and there's a robot doing it the whole time. So we're all in this moment of the curtains pulled back. It's the Wizard of Oz, is being revealed kind of thing. I like to say to people, though, if you are feeling fear about, your technical problem solving and all the stuff that you've invested in, people have still encountered this brutal culture and cleared these bars of selection and really brought their powerful minds, to technical problem solving. And they are afraid of losing that, if their work changes. I do not think that this is a moment where we're going to lose the need for technical problem solving at all. I see the same engineering skill sets. When I look at this as a cognitive scientist, I see people needing to think about systems, needing to think about designing robustly, needing to think about all these things. It's happening in a different way. Boy, do I think it's going to be messy. I'm not saying it's easy, all of that stuff. But I do think that if in this moment you're an engineer who's thinking, gosh, but I really care about technical problem solving, like, you still should care about technical problem solving. That is going to be what we need. But so that's like thing one. Thing two is the social stuff. Is the social stuff going to become much more a part of people's jobs? And is that an opportunity for people to be welcomed in this field who perhaps have really strong skills in those domains? I hope so. I honestly don't know, like, if I were to make a prediction right now, which ways it's gonna go, I really hope it's an opportunity to see that the social problem solving is an incredibly important part of this, that there are people in this world who have deep skill for it. I'm really interested also in like allowing there are existing engineers who are already really good at writing, and their writing skill didn't get valued. Could it get valued now or exist engineers who care, or people just adjacent to tech who cared a lot about clean documentation? Wow, does that matter for how well your AI, performs when you're integrating it, right? So I think there is so much opportunity for that. I worry about effects that we see out there. I will say, in my research, even in 2023, I did a study on AI and how it was making developers feel about, whether they belonged. And we saw big gender effects. We saw big race effects as well, so I think there are differences in how this is affecting people because of the existing problems in tech. And I worry about who might get left behind, because I think it's really not just about how good you are, your skills, it's about how people see you. And so I worry about who, the same people coming out on top and being seen as technical, and the same people not being seen as technical for some reason that has nothing to do with the work that they're doing. But so that's a lot. That's another big topic. But
the way it could be completely off this, but like from my own experience, and this leads me to my last question too, is I never grew up as a developer. I didn't have computers, but like I saw people creating software, and I was like, I want to be able to do that. That looks really cool. And the hard part for me was learning the code, right? Like the software, like I don't know how to software engineer. Like I had to learn, I had to struggle to learn how to do that. And then that became part of my identity. When then I was like, oh, I found myself to this point where like now I can do the thing that I wanted to do before, and I tied myself to like I'm a Python developer because I know how to do Python. And so those were like part of my core identity because I conquered and learned the thing that I thought was hard about the job. And just like with the car, where I wanted a car that had 30 miles to the gallon, all of a sudden electric cars came out. And miles to gallon doesn't even make sense anymore, right? Like, why are you measuring? Like, wait a minute, hold on. Like now we have kilowatts. What are you talking about gallons, right? And just the whole notion about the measurement of like what is possible has changed. But my identity has been tied to this. I had to learn something hard. I don't want to learn something hard again, right?
But Justin, the identity was about how you were brave enough to learn something hard. It wasn't about Python, right?
Well, and that's where a lot of people are at, I think. And a lot of people are like, I'm a JavaScript developer, and now this AI is going to take my job because it can write better JavaScript than I can, and it does it faster, and it doesn't need health breaks or anything like that, right? Like, it doesn't go on vacation. They can just spend more money and get more of it. And I feel like a lot of people feel threatened by that because their identity has been tied to this hard thing that they had to learn, which is a hard thing, but it's not the complete story. Like you've been saying over and over again, they're a lot more than just writing this syntax into a text editor that gets run somewhere by a computer. And one of the things that when I was a baby engineer, I read a paper it was Google, I think, that the number one key metric for successful and effective teams was psychological safety. And I've kind of kept that as a golden metric for me without knowing how to measure it, right? As like a thing that's like, hey, if you feel safe on the team and you feel like you can take risks, then you have the ability to learn new things, and you have the ability to try new things, and you have the ability to succeed in a lot of ways that you can't succeed if it's you do this one thing this way forever and ever, you're done, right? Like that's all we want out of you. And in bringing in the lessons, the ability to learn, being able, the ability to use new tools, like not being forced on you. Like some companies are like, you are using Copilot because we paid for it and it has to succeed, whatever. Like, no, like being able to say, actually, I want you to go explore, go vibe code something. We probably won't put it in production, but I want you just to see what that looks like, and then see where your value actually comes as a person who can orchestrate across teams, across products, across code, and then write it down, write some good docs, right? And know that the AI maybe didn't generate the right thing here, right? Being able to call those things out. And I'm curious if that metric of psychological safety is as impactful today as I think it is. I think
that's been the most impactful thing in my whole career as an engineer. When you feel like you can be like psychologically safe, you grow so much more.
When I can show up on a stand-up and said, I messed up yesterday, right? And like, this is, I submitted this PR, it was pulled in, or I wasted 2 days of work because I went down the wrong path and I did something. Like when I can do that in a stand-up and still feel like everyone's like, okay, no problem. What do you need? Right? I feel like the Vista team has my back.
But do you think that do you think that it's easier if you're a white guy in tech to get that psychological
100%,
safety?
100%. Yes.
When how like people perceive you though? Because
but
I feel
also,
like
I will say like, as a white person in tech, I have psychological safety vertically, but not necessarily horizontally, depending on the rest of my team structure, right? If I'm the one white dude on a team of black women, I feel not psychologically safe because I don't fit into the culture.
But we know that's not possible.
I know it. It may not be possible, but there are times like, when I don't feel like I fit. A unicorn
that doesn't even have like a statistic.
Well, wow. Okay. Can I just take you two, into the rooms that I'm in, and you can both give these beautiful like descriptions of why psychology matters, because this is what I'm trying to prove all the time. And I think that in every way, like that, the evidence tells us that these are the mechanisms of our minds and bodies that let us solve problems in the world. Like, if you're not psychologically safe, if you're a minoritized person, right? Like, as Autumn's pointing out, you are being kept in what we call like cognitive vigilance state, because you have to process a bunch of other information all the time that people like Justin and I, don't have to process, like around being safe, and also like managing people around you. And that's what like bad cultures and horrible beliefs, about people that don't allow us to see everyone's potential do to the world. They take away so many people's resources in those moments. So we have to solve that. Like we have to solve that. It is cutting us away from, all kinds of things that we need. I think that it shows up super clearly in, my research. Every psychological measure that I use, Justin, is some version of what you've described. So I put out this project that we called Developer Thriving. We measured learning culture. So do you feel like you can, for instance, admit to your teammates that you don't know something? Do you feel like if there's a roadmap thing that you're not going to hit because there's something you need to learn, sometimes your boss will actually let you learn rather than hitting the milestone? Like those kinds of indicators are learning culture indicators, and very much tap into you feel safe to learn. We measured developer agency, including, do you have the agency to say the way you're measuring me is wrong? How much does your team let you do that? That's actually one of the measures that I proposed and published and said, hey, you guys should use this. We measure sense of belonging. Sense of belonging is a really powerful psychological outcome. It's been tested like across, tens of thousands of people. And it basically is like, it really picks up on, all the things you might think of as psychological safety. It's a different sort of nuance of it is, you want people to be able to feel like they belong in your environments. It is a big red flag if they don't. And so I include it all the time. And I included it in my study about AI, and developers who felt like I can really belong in tech. They were able to imagine, their skills changing without, having that fear that they were no longer going to be an engineer. Now, all of that being said, psychology is just one thing we have to bring to this. There's lots of other experts that you talk to and stuff like that, like the labor problems, the layoffs. I recognize we're pushing on a lot of buttons, but just to speak to my piece, the teams that are able to have those cultures they report being more productive. The developers say my team's more effective. And I believe the vast amount of the research shows that those companies function better, the problems get solved better, things work better. That's going to keep happening even if we use AI, because that's our cognitive architecture. We need that stuff.
That's really interesting.
I'm trying to remember there was a quote from the paper Cathedral and the Bazaar about open source and closed source in the one line that I still remember, and there was something along the lines of like happiness predicts productivity. Or something along those lines, or like enjoyment predicts like if you enjoy where you're at and what you're doing, you will just be better at what you're doing. And that was one of the arguments for like open source is just going to win this closed source ecosystem, because people that do open source do it for fun. Right? They're doing it because they enjoy it. They like the problem space. They like the people, whatever the case may be. And that was really fascinating.
I think that makes sense, because if you have the Sunday scaries and you dread going to your job, or you are constantly trying to mitigate some sort of other issue, that takes so much of your brain power away from doing your job.
And at the same end, right, like open source is hard to quit. Right. Once you're a maintainer of something, it's hard to walk away from it and say, like, I can't do this anymore.
It's also a place that people, I think, build really good relationships.
Yeah.
And I think those good relationships bring you back, like.
Yeah. There's an interesting. I was just going to say this. The original psychological safety research is people always kind of frame it like this is about good feelings. But a lot of that research is about information flow. Is this a place where the leaders will hear the person who has the critical information in a moment of crisis, because they are not afraid of telling you? They're not afraid of being a dissenting voice. They're not afraid of challenging that story that everybody's telling. We need that in order to face really challenging times. So I think I
honestly think that's what gave Amazon operational excellence for so long. It was because their COEs were bridged as, it can't be anyone's fault, because if there's a button you can push that ruins everything, then we need to rebuild this. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well, it's a power dynamic, right? Because that's the same thing with SREs at Google, right? The SRE book, the thing that no one does SRE correctly is because SREs at Google had the power to say no. They said, actually, your service sucks and I'm not going to support it until you meet this new criteria. Yeah. They had the ability to say, I can't do that because I'm not going to be on call for your crap, right?
Developer agency. Yeah.
Well, that and being able to admit you were wrong, or admit that you made a mistake, or admit that you need help, or you don't know something. Like, I think that was the most toxic part about being a new engineer in Amazon. It was that you were supposed to pretend like you didn't need help. And
that all ties back into RTOs and layoffs, right? If like you don't have the psychological safety to say, actually, that's going to suck. You shouldn't do that. And leadership's not going to listen. Guess what? You have no power. Kat, last thing I want to ask you about is your book. You're still teaching people about all of this stuff, and what is the book about? When's it roughly coming out? I know books don't always have a hard deadline.
I know. It's my editor will kill me. I just got an email this morning that says we're sending it to production. I got a very exciting email that said the files they're locked into production mode now. So
you're already done through edits.
It's happening.
No, you're good. Yeah,
it's happening. Yes, it's the psychology of software teams. Our target launch date is May, so very soon. If you sign up for my newsletter or follow me on socials, I'll make a lot of announcements and also share a lot of behind the scenes stuff. I read so much research that not all of it could fit in the book. So I'm going to do a series on my newsletter as well. That's kind of about all the interesting research I did for the book, but it tackles all of this, y'all. Everything that we talked about around psychological safety is a huge part of it. And I really hope that what it gives people is backup. I want this to be a book that people feel like they can send their boss or send their spouse to help them understand what it's like to be a developer. I tackle some myths about software development in it, which I'm really passionate about, myths that I think hold us back around.
What are some of the myths that you talk about?
Well, hey, where did all this come from that we think that we could judge developers by how fast they write code? Where did that come from? I look back at some early software conversations and ideas of what we should judge developers by. I also look at a lot of stuff around what do we think is a fixed, innate trait of an individual versus what you can actually change for yourself by like improving your environment. So some of the fundamental attribution error stuff that we talked about plays a role there. I loved writing this project. I did not expect to write a book, as a scientist, big nerd. And an editor reached out to me one day and said, I think that software needs a book about psychology. And so taking it from ranting on social media into a book form has been really fun.
Well, that's absolutely like the backup side of it I can see, because even things like Dora, right? Like until Accelerate came out, I couldn't necessarily say like, here's a study, go read it. And they're like, I don't want to study. Like, this is the real world. And I'm like, okay, well, once you have a book, you're like, oh, it's not... Check out Cat's newsletter. It explains everything. It's like, no, here's the book that you should go read.
It's a real book. Yeah, it's a real book. And there's citations. You could read them if you want, but you don't need to. And one of my friends said, please let it come out in hardcover so that I can hit people with it. I want it to be heavy. And so...
You might have to get them to listen at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
I also saw something about your grandpa telling you should write a book. That makes me so happy for you. That's so rad that you did all this work helping people and hiring PhDs and doing the work that I feel like sometimes the unsung heroes of talking about the stuff that maybe doesn't make a ton of money but actually really does improve everything. I feel like we keep telling people this gets you more ROI and this is going to make it better, and they keep not listening. So I really appreciate that you're doing the hard work that we really need in the industry.
Wow, I can't really wait
to read
touched
your
by
book.
that. Thank you. My grandpa grew up on a farm in Missouri that didn't have indoor plumbing, and he was the first of his siblings to go past 8th grade, and he did it by walking really far from their farm until they were not on the bus track for school, nearly. They were very remote, and so he just... can you imagine a little 13-year-old Missouri boy, love my family, very, very uneducated family. And he walked until he found a farm, and he knocked on their door and said, does the bus come here? And he found the farm, the furthest farm that the bus came to. And they said, yes. And he said, could you let me board, at your farm? And I'll do chores and just let me board during the week so I can go to school. And that's how he went to school. So I don't know.
That's so badass. You're breaking generational boundaries, that's really cool. I always tell my kids that getting an education when they complain to school, I'm like, dude, that's just an opportunity that people didn't have that used to look like you. Getting an education and getting to go to school every day is an opportunity that you should be grateful for. So I think that's super rad. I think your grandpa will be super proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
We will have links to Cat, your website, newsletter, the book, all that in the show notes, so people can go find it. If anyone's interested, check them out for sure. And thanks so much for coming on, and we will see everyone next month.
A pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Fork Around and Find Out. If you like this show, please consider sharing it with a friend, a coworker, a family member, or even an enemy. However we get the word out about this show helps it to become sustainable for the long term. If you want to sponsor this show, please go to fafo.fm/sponsor and reach out to us there about what you're interested in sponsoring and how we can help. We hope your systems stay available and your pagers stay quiet. We'll see you again next time.